everyone, this is Ron from High Tech Legion, and this is part of our review of the Arctic Accelero Hybrid self-contained liquid cooling solution for your video card. And this is a part where I show you how to install this cooler onto your video card, but since the Accelero Hybrid is compatible with a wide range of video cards in the market, I can only show you, unfortunately, how to install it on a reference GTX 580 that I have here, which I will be using as a test video card. It is actually compatible, the Accelero Hybrid that is, compatible with current and previous generation video cards as well. So that's a lot of video card compatibility. Just make sure that you have the proper tools to perform this task. And namely, in order to remove the screws, you will need a precision screwdriver, or essentially any screwdriver that has a smaller tip in the end to remove these smaller screws. I'm going to show you how to remove this one by one. I've actually removed the screws already at the back of the PCB here, which actually, except for the ones that are behind this, that are holding the heatsink for the GPU area. But for this one, if you want to remove the shroud, you actually have to remove the screws on the side first, which I will do right now. And always make sure to keep tray handy. I've used the cover for the Arctic Accelero Hybrid cold plate as my handy screw holder. And these can be tight. Aftermarket cooling is actually easier to remove than these, but even these are not really a concern, as long as, of course, you make sure you ground yourself properly and you have the proper tools. And these are actually a lot easier compared to removing with older generation cards. I removed a GTX 465 before, and that required some more pinching, but these ones actually are held with screws on the side, the shroud that is, so it's a lot easier. Some are quite stubborn since they haven't been removed at all. There we go, a bit tight. I'll probably fast forward this part of the video just so you don't get bored. Alright, we have removed all the screws here, and before we remove the heatsink, just give it a once over. Make sure that no screws are in there. Didn't forget anything. Usually, since it is a reference design, as you can see, there are no stickers blocking some screws. You might actually get your serial number sticker there if you have an EVGA or a XFX or different kind of a video card there. An ASUS video card. They usually place a sticker there covering one of the screws. So make sure to check those. And now we're ready to remove. Let's remove the heatsink first. This is basically sticking in place there because of the thermal paste that's used there. You just wiggle it a bit before you pull it up. There you go. Just slight wiggling. You can see copper block there. And the aluminum fins. Of course, you put this aside. Then make sure again, no screws left. Depending on the design of your heatsink, you don't want to just remove this. There's actually metal here, which essentially acts as another layer of heatsink on the components. Some more dust bunnies in there. And there might be thermal padding in between, so it's not, again, similar to the heatsink. It might take a little bit of wiggling. Alright, so I have removed all the stock heatsink in there and cleaned up the PCB. And the next step is to determine whether what Arctic calls an area A, area B, or area C. You have to determine if your video card is that type so that you can determine how you're going to mount the shroud on top of that. The area A is essentially if you have a video card that has the 4-pin PWM fan connector. So look for the PWM fan connector location. If it's located here in the rear, it is area A, and you have to route the cable that you see here all to the other side. Or if you have area B, which is what I have here, it is located here at the edges, here on the lower edge, or here. And area C, which is pretty much in this area right here right near the where the VRM components are. So I have ARB, so what I'm going to do is route my cables here out of the way and make sure that it is located. Make sure that as long as it ends up here on this side right here once I plug in everything. Before we proceed with installation, let's familiarize ourselves with the screws and washers first. Here you get the screws in the manual are named by letter. So you have the A screws. These are actually the A screws here. And you have the B screws are the, I believe there's only two of them. There you go. These are the two B screws, which are for holding down the hose later on. And you also get the spacers here. The spacers are for different sizes. You get basically 1.5 millimeter, the small ones. You get the 3.5 millimeter, the black one, and the largest one, the 4 millimeter spacers. There are all four of them, four for each different type. So make sure these are the easiest to lose since they're small and translucent. So you have to be careful. Keep your workspace clean in order to keep track of those. You never know. Once you lose it, you won't be able to mount your Arctic Accelero Hybrid. And also the C screws, you have four of them here, and your D screws, which are larger here. And the E and F screws are actually in this pack right here. They have their own washers. You can see one is smaller and one is taller. And you have insulation tape here. These are essentially used so that when you put the aluminum heatsink on top, they don't ground your some of your components with the VRM if it's extending to that area. So these are basically optional to use. You have these metallic washers, two of them. These are actually, I believe these are with the these screws right here for holding down the hose later on. You have more of these rubber pads. There's only three of them, so probably one is extra. You're only going to use probably two. You have your thermal pads right here. You can use those, and you have more of the fiber washers and let's see here, adhesive tape. You have these are the adhesive tapes here, and you have the rubber washers again, and of course the pad for lifting. I believe this is for the backplate, the EVA foam for the backplate mounting later on, so it doesn't ground it. And that's pretty much what you're going to need right now. Make sure to, of course, let's put this aside again. Put it aside so that it doesn't, you don't lose track of them, and they are essential to your installation. Just keep them close by, right there. Don't lose them. And then grab our Accelero Hybrid shroud here. As you can see, I've already laid it out in the type B position where I have it routed into this area out of the fan, and where my 4-pin PWM fan plug will go. Of course, I'll do some more cable management later on, and then we take our main unit itself. You have the radiator here, you have the hose, and the self-contained pump, and then we basically put it on top of the shroud. Position it. Depending on your setup, it will be different. Consult your manual in this case, but for the GTX 580, as you can see, there are notches there where I will align these locks right here on the side. So, and also you can see there that there are these sort of guides in there that you will screw into it later, so it doesn't move out of position. And there you go. It will basically be routed here on the side. If you have a GTX 680, you actually have to route one of the tubes out, but if just for regular use, you actually just route it inside right here. As you can see, it's already moving, so it will take a little bit of managing to kind of hold it in place. Thankfully, these are flexible rubber hoses, so they stay in place for the most part. And this area right here should when everything's laid out, this area will touch, of course, your GPU core while you have an active cooling on your VRM area. Now we're going to go to the next step. We're going to grab my tools and secure the hose in place, and then, of course, I will show you how to put in the the little heat sinks onto your critical components. Alright, the next step will be to secure the hose that we've positioned in there with the self-contained unit. We take the D screws, rather I believe the C screws actually, the C screws that you see here, and then we screw it in place. There are actually, if you align it properly, you can see that the mounting holes align with the plate on the side of this. Again, they're very small. Take extra precaution when you're mounting it. Might also want to mount I didn't route the cable earlier, but I'm doing it now. Make sure you don't, there we go, mount it in place again. This actually plugs here, so I'm surprised it didn't show you in the manual to do that first, but I was just doing that right now before even putting in the main unit. So it'll be hard later on once you've screwed it in place already. There you go. Let's plug it in there. If you can remove this part here to make it easier, the lock. There you go. You can actually do that. Makes life much easier. There we go. Plug in the pump into there, so you also have full speed, and then just lock it in place. Make sure, be careful, because these are plastic parts locking that in place, so you might, if you damage that, you're kind of out of luck there. So be careful. Once again, make sure you route everything properly and align the holes properly. There we go. Again, take our C screws, lock them in place. You might need to hold your unit like this when you screw it in. Perfect. Make sure it's secured. Another one's over. You don't want this to be moving around once you're ready. There you go. As you can see, I have my cables in there. Make sure it is underneath, tucked underneath the hose, so it's sort of easier to manage. And then the next step is, of course, secure the hose here with the washers, and some of the screws you use, I believe these are the B screws with the metallic washers. Let's grab those. Okay, let's see, the B screws are the one with the metallic flap in the end, so let's put that and the washers combined, and you basically position it there so the hose doesn't fly off. Again, make sure that you have allowance in there so that you don't need to adjust it later on. You have enough, give the hose enough slack so that it's positioned properly. And again, GTX 580 is a slightly different mounting. Consult your manual for that because of some critical components on top of the hose area. Plus, there are those 680 designs that have the stacked power connectors. So I believe that's what it's avoiding. And the second one here, it's good to go, and we pretty much have most of the work done now. We just need to put in thermal pads for our critical components and the thermal adhesive and the heat sinks. So there you have it. As you can see, it won't move in place now. Our cable is managed around it. It's not interfering with the operation. and you have your cables ready to be plugged in. So let's put this aside and go back to our PCB, and then make sure to install the heatsinks. Alright, we're back here with our PCB, and I am just sizing out the layout of where to put in the aluminum heatsinks for the voltage regulator area and the memory. As you can see here, Arctic provides a generous helping of aluminum heatsinks in various shapes and sizes that you can use. And probably wondering, how will I know there's enough clearance in the GPU area to wherever I can mount the memory heatsinks? Well, they provide a spacer module you can put right in the middle. See there? Make sure you have it in the middle there, and make sure that it doesn't interfere wherever you're going to put the aluminum heatsink. Don't put adhesive on them yet, because once you put in the adhesive, they are pretty much permanent. So you have that layout there, and you position the heatsinks in place. And then, of course, depending on the layout, you might have some issues with grounding, especially here in the VRM area. Just lift that up. In that case, for example, if you have a heatsink that is too large or might be encroaching into those critical components there, especially the capacitors, what I would suggest is using the insulating spacers that Arctic provides. You can just take a strip of this and line that on each side before you glue the heatsink in place. And then you won't have any issues with the grounding. And of course, you apply the thermal adhesive in there. This is a thermal adhesive, not to be confused with thermal paste. Thermal paste comes off easily. This one is pretty much permanent once you put it in. So you have to really plan it perfectly, and it takes a curing. There's a curing time of about 60 minutes. So make sure to leave time for that, allow for that to cure properly before you mount the heatsink, so that it stays in place. If not, it will only stay there for a while and then fall off once enough heat is applied. Also, if you don't like the sound of that permanent, you can use a thermal tape as an alternative. Of course, it won't have the same cooling capability. That is, of course, only if you're really concerned about overclocking, really getting the most out of it. After all, this is a $170 heatsink, so you might probably be interested in overclocking as well. And in that case, if you don't like the permanent idea, you can use a thermal pad. You can buy a thermal pad. This is not provided in an accessory package, but there are thin thermal pads that you can use. They're about, I think the Sekisui is a Japanese brand. It's about 0.5 millimeters. I've seen that before in industrial use, but you can use it in this case. You can probably buy it in import stores, but they're not really readily available in other stores. But for that case, you can use it for these if you don't want it to be permanent. You can easily remove those compared to this one, but they can still withstand and transfer heat. Alright, as you can see, I have all my heat sinks in there in place, and I've cured it for at least 60 minutes or 1 hour so that it don't move around even when I apply heat later on. And the next step will be, of course, to put in our assembly there, our shroud assembly that we've got in here. So let me just put that aside. I'm going to show you the shroud here. I have the mounting holes. We have to decide which mounting hole we're going to use. For the GTX 580, we actually use the outer ones. Actually provides this guide here, the same mounting hole guide here. The outer ones are for the GTX 580, which we have. So I'm going to take some adhesive tape here, adhesive tapes, and then mount the 4mm standoffs. You see there? So they stand up. Alright, so I have positioned it now, and next step is now to put in the backplate and completely secure it in place. Take the EVA spacer here. You have the foam. Essentially, it will compress, and the side with the adhesive backing, make sure it faces upwards. Just position it there. You don't need to put it in. And then we take our 3.5mm spacers, put them in place. So where you're going to put in the screws, 4 corners. Then you take your backplate, which you got 4, and I believe number D screws, and you have your backplate here, which is, see there, it has the same mounting hole spacings as the space provided and the mount at the bottom, so it should line up. After that, let's see here. What screws do we need? We need the D screws, which I have here. It will stay in place. Of course, you have to remove the adhesive backing, which will help you with keeping the foam in place there. And we align it so it doesn't get grounded. And let me just make sure that I have the proper positioning, the outer holes there. There we go. You don't want to stick the adhesive there when a little prematurely. And then we use the screws to lock it in place. These are actually very, very small, so I have to use either my precision toolkit here. Alright, once everything is secure, make sure that it is completely secure there. Each corner. Should be able to just flip it over now. See that our Accelero Hybrid is ready to be installed in our system. You might want to put back the shroud, see here, for the back plate. Just need to screw it in place again because you need something to hold it in place inside your system, of course, when you install it. And I'm going to show you that right now. I'm going to install, of course. Let me just put this aside a bit. Let me show you what it looks like completed. And there we go. We need a little bit of cable management here. As you can see, the cables hang out. We can just I'm going to tie that around the air right here. It's actually air where I could lock it in place. There you go. Here around, just on the side of the hybrid, so it doesn't block. And also the power wire here will power the full 12 volt. Now I'm going to put back the back of this video card, and I'm going to show you how to install now the Accelero Hybrid into our test system. Alright, so here I have installed the GTX 580 with the Accelero Hybrid cooler intact, and I've removed the heatsink from my CPU temporarily so I can demonstrate you the areas here. I have plenty of options. This is the NZXT Phantom 810. It is a full tower case, so I have plenty of options here, or I could mount the radiator. There you can take the E and F set of screws to mount the fan here. I think it's the long one of the E and the F set of screws, and install the radiator with the fan. And of course, don't forget to plug that in. Once you're done, you have a PWM fan connector in there, and you also get the Molex connector to power the pump. Never forget that. And if you want to dampen down the noise on the 80mm fan on the GPU on the Accelero Hybrid, there's also a converter included, which actually converts the Molex power into a 7 volt. And it's a splitter, essentially a 12 volt and a 7 volt. That's of course depending on your setup. Now we're back to how to mount the radiator. In this case, my test case, I have options. I can mount it here at the top, but I have to mount it as an exhaust, so I have to remount the fans here at the bottom and mount it as an exhaust. As you can see, it's definitely possible in this case. Or I could just add on an additional one here. While it will obstruct my CPU cooler, I could try to mount it here at the rear, but as you can see, since GTX 580 is quite long, it doesn't, the hose doesn't reach the back all the way. So that option is gone. I can mount only the top. I have 3 other options here at the top, since this case can actually fit a 360mm long radiator. And also there is a fan here. I could mount the radiator right there, but it's too close to the video card. And I could just remove this actually. Most mid-tower cases actually have this option now, so just either I can pull that out, and if you look closely, there is an intake fan here at the front as well. I could remove that and put in my radiator there and my fan already. But I found the most optimal solution in this case in particular. It all depends on your case, but just in this case, what I found, let me move the camera slowly pan down here. most cases have this option. Now, I never really used it until now. There's an intake option. It fits a 120mm and 140mm fan. Since I can remove that and put in a 240 radiator, in this case I can actually use that without changing the stock fan configuration and altering my results too far to the stock option, since this is the stock option I have when I ran it with the stock cooling for the case. And I have the intake here, the fan set as an intake, and I can just install it here at the bottom, mount it with the F screws with the washers, and screw it from underneath here, so I can still use the fan as an intaking cold air, and essentially unobstructed from everything without adding additional, without changing the original stock fan configuration of this case. And I could compare it with my result to see how well the Arctic Accelero Hybrid performs on the GTX 580 with the stock cooling option and with this self-contained liquid cooling solution. And of course, I'm going to put in my power supply back here. I'm going to put in my heatsink again and run those benchmarks. You can read my conclusion at www.heatsinks.com, or just click the link below in more info. And subscribe to our Facebook, facebook.com/HCLReviews. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/HightechLegion. Leave questions or comments. And this is Ron, once again, signing out.